And round two of Lone Star Drift 2022 will be at MSR Houston on May 21st and 22nd. There'll be tons of drifting, tons of rad cars, tons of cool stuff going on. We'll have food trucks, things for spectators, great viewing angles. Please come out, bring a helmet, ride along in some drift cars. I will see you there. Let's get started with this video.
Hey guys, to start off this video, everybody always says V8s sound terrible and they're not exciting to drift, and they're very wrong. And this thing sounds amazing, and let's fire it up and show you what the little circle track car is about, and then we'll talk about it. I don't want to change anything about this engine except maybe make more horsepower, because listen to this thing. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Fielding's always telling me V8s sound terrible. Go suck at fielding. I have the circle track car kind of buried right now, and there's the E36, the Pro-Am car that I have. And today we're talking about which direction we're going to take this car. So we've already tested it. We already made it a drift car, and what I'm always trying to do is, I guess, waste money and have fun projects. But this is supposed to be a specific project that's not like, that thing is supposed to be 650 wheel, like Pro-Am car. Probably weighs about 2,700 pounds, I'm guessing. Very similar to like, any pretty modified and good drift car that's been built in the past decade. Very similar formula, big angle, cage, rear mount radiator, bunch of horsepower, put good tires on it and rip around. The problem with cars like that is they can be kind of high consumable. And we could just do like, I used to have an E36 that was basically stock power, angle kit suspension, and super stripped out. And I would run my dead scrubs on it, and it was a fantastic car, but it lacked in one department, we'll get to, which is basically, it was a good drift car, but not a fantastic drift car, because it didn't have enough power to like really boogie and chase down the fastest cars on track. And this is supposed to be an iteration, which is different than this and all the other cars, where it's going to be an anti-consumable machine. I'm always trying to build anti-consumable machines, all the way back to, I was trying to build like a methanol or like super high quality E85 SR20 S13 that was trying to get down to like 2,200 pounds or less caged, so that I could run a car that was as cheap as possible to run. Obviously fuel can get expensive, and it can just replace the cost of tires, which sucks. But like without an intercooler, with like a little teeny tiny Civic radiator, moving things around, like how light could we reasonably get a car? And that still would have been turbo with all that stuff. But anyways, this is the new iteration of that. So first of all, I want to make it drift better. So we're going to have to do some drifty mods to make it drift better. It's already pretty good, but it's not a dial drift car. 2, we want to get the tire wear as good as possible. 3, we have to do everything to make it those places. So let's chat about that real quick and look around the car. So if you are not familiar with this car, let me get you up to speed real quickly. I have a wide angle in, so it looks all wacky distorted. It is a stock car, like a little NASCAR under series kind of thing. It is a 358 small block Chevy attached to a 4-speed transmission. Runs on race gas, makes only about 330 wheel, even though it's probably a really expensive motor. It has 14.1 compression and runs like 114 fuel. I was cheating and putting a little bit less fuel in there. Hopefully it doesn't blow up. As we modified this car to make it a drift car, we added steering angle, changed it over to Nissan Bolt pattern, did drifty tires and stuff and wheels. What else did we do? Added handbrake, changed up the suspension quite a bit with springs and everything. We haven't gone too far past that yet. The system cools amazingly well. This thing does not overheat. It's a fantastic base for a drift car. We added an alternator and did some little things like that. Let's talk first about making it a better drift car. To make this car a better drift car, realistically, you could always use more power, but then that can screw up consumables later. So I could change the car from a 390 CFM up to a 750, and supposedly that'll probably bring in 50 to 100 horsepower. We're not sure because I don't know too much about it. But it is a fully built motor, like full rotating assembly, even an aftermarket crank and everything. So it's a full race car motor, so it should make some power. It didn't make much power simply because it was a class restricted motor, which was restricted through the carb. I would like to adjust the seat a teeny tiny bit to hold me a little tiny bit better because I have to brace myself in, but everything in here is pretty rad. I really like the cockpit. I like the way the thing drives. I could make some adjustments to the steering, mostly just in alignment, to make the thing handle a little bit differently. We could make it drift better with adjustable shocks, so I can adjust rebound and dampening separately. Probably wrong, but make it somewhere better. We could remove some weight. We could do some things. We could, what else? I think those are the big things to make it drift better, is maybe some more horsepower, some more shock tuning, me a little bit more comfortable in the seat. We could always use more angle, but we're kind of at the point where the angle is where it's going to be, and we could always make it lighter. The problem with making it lighter is you end up either making it a junk car that you kind of hate, which would be cutting out like this bar right here vertically, all this bar, this X thing in the middle here, and this vertical bar. All that could probably go. I'm not really quite sure how much that would weigh. Probably, I don't know, 35 pounds of tubing maybe. That's kind of not in a terrible place to remove it. It wouldn't disrupt the weight of the car too much. It would be better to remove it from the front, and we could talk about that in a second. We could go to a teeny tiny battery, maybe even take off the AccuSump, but that would affect reliability. This would probably make it a crappier car to have around because on a tiny battery, it's more likely to die. And also it's in a really good place. That's super low, middle of the car. Moving that around might increase tire wear. Like, not moving it around, but messing with the size of the battery might increase tire wear and stuff, but it's not necessarily going to do anything drastic. Maybe if we add up a ton of little things, we might get there. We could also move the radiator back and move the oil cooler back. However, moving the radiator back actually increases the weight of the car a little bit and the lines, because you have probably another 3 gallons of fluid in the lines. It doesn't overheat right now whatsoever. It runs super cool. So we'd be adding, 30 pounds, probably moving it to the back. An extra capacity of the fluid in the lines. The problem with that is it would help by moving it back, but it'd increase weight, but it would also just add more complexity to the system since it is currently on a mechanical fan. Oh, it's a plastic fan too, that's funny. And this works so well, there's not much use of moving it back. And I would think it would cool worse moving it to the back because you'd be going to an electric fan, which would not be as strong. You would also be going to less airflow through the system. So this is pretty good. Still need to do something about this to capture it because I'm tandeming, getting super close to people, and there's just really expensive giant AN fittings sticking out in front of the car. So we do need to move this, but that'll just be so it doesn't wreck, not because that's gonna do anything great. So I think those are the easiest things. Probably the number one issue to solve would be the adjustable rear shocks in the back. God, this thing looks so weird from certain angles with this camera. All right. And there are a bunch of things we could do. Do we really need an oil filter that big? We could downsize some things by deleting the AccuSump and going to a smaller oil filter. The car's probably going to be worse off and less safe, but you'd probably save 20 pounds with all that junk, moving it, decreasing the capacity of the lines, and simplifying things. There's really not too much up here. If we did want to get crazy, we could cut off the front frame rails and go to a tube structure. I have no idea how much all this weighs, but we could probably save a good 50 pounds up there. Drew's actually working in the back. There he goes, he stopped. We could probably save 50 pounds or 30 pounds off the front of the car by chopping all this off and redoing it. But man, that creates a lot of work, and everything works right now. And I don't really want to go through all that effort. But if we did move this to the back, we could probably take 30 pounds off the front of the car, move it to the back, which would be good for weight distribution. Cut this off, we could probably get 80 pounds off the front of the car and still have an iron block. Even though those iron blocks are very lightweight, we could probably get 80 pounds off the front of the car. There's certain things like this thing too. We could just take this off the car, but right now, it doesn't really need to. It's not gonna be a lot of weight, and this is the light side of the car. So removing more weight from this side doesn't really help. So, all right, that's what I think is the next stage of making the thing better. Oh, and obviously seating position is kind of important. That just needs to be like shifted a little bit. I could even just put padding in the seat or something to make it a little bit better for me and more comfortable. The car, because of the way you sit, I sit so low, it's a little bit hard to see over the front for tandem, even though there's nothing on the front of the car, but whatever. One more silly thought. If I did a bigger carb, one cool thing is because it's a carb, I can just take this carb off, set it on the shelf, do a 750, they're like $450 or something like that. And if I did not like the carb, I could put the other one on, it would already be tuned and ready to go. So we wouldn't lose much time, maybe, 30 minutes swapping the carb over to the other one. So the real secret of this car is not really making it more competitive or something, because an E36 is already really good. We could just put a 600 horsepower V8 in there or whatever. The real thing would be making this like the anti-consumable car and making it as light as possible, as good of tire wear as possible, all these different things leading in like a beautiful spiral of goodness of making the car amazing. And our problems, though, we need to identify in consumables right now. The most expensive things on a car are A, traveling, so like diesel in the truck. 2, distance to events and all that kind of stuff, whatever, that's all in the traveling. Tires are probably what we think of as the number one consumable on these cars. And then 3 broken parts, or 4 broken parts. 5, fuel. Now this car is built like a real race car, so breakage I don't think is going to be a thing. It has a 9-inch rear axle with 40 spline, aftermarket chromoly axle shafts. It's built of lots of really tough parts, and if I did blow the engine, I probably wouldn't get another $20,000 circle track engine. I would buy a Crate 350 small block and toss it in there. Probably wouldn't make much less horsepower. Probably most of the awesome noise of the thing would be coming from the exhaust anyways. I was talking to some circle track guys to ask if the high compression motors make them sound way different. And they're like, nah, the exhaust does most of it. Yeah, at Pocono, they had a line of 5 like school rental stock cars that were similar to this with different like types of engines and everything else. And I was asking them about the noise of each car by exhaust and by compression ratio and all that stuff. And they were like, for the school cars, we actually take out the high comp race motors when we get these cars and put in small block Chevys. So hopefully that's pretty like a good backup solution, is just to have a small block stock motor. We can't really change traveling expenses that much. Car is probably not going to break, and if it does break, it's not going to be too big of a deal. So that comes down to what the highest cost of this car for consumables is right now, is fuel, believe it or not. But fuel's not super exciting to talk about, and it's also a pain. And to fix that, we would swap over to a small block crate motor. I don't want to do that yet because I want to play with this motor some more. So we're not going to deal with fuel right now. In fact, if we change over the carb to make more horsepower, we're going to actually increase the fuel consumption of the car, most likely making it worse. Now, why fuel is a big deal on this thing is because it runs on like 114, and I'm cheating right now and running it probably just at like 105 octane. And the fuel is more expensive than the tires. At the last event, we went through about 45 to 50 gallons of race fuel. It was $8 a gallon plus some octane booster of like $8 a can or $10 a can, which brought us up to, I don't know, I don't want to think about it. Probably about $500 in just fuel. And since the car only used 4 Velinos, fuel is a bigger deal. But I don't typically have cars that use fancy, expensive fuel, and I don't want to change over to E85 because E85 is not stable for storage for long periods of time, and I don't want an E85 carb car. Sounds like a huge pain in the butt. So we're gonna ignore the fuel right now, and especially because it's really simple, I can just change over to a low compression motor. I could even just pull this out and set it on the shelf, and because it's such a simplistic item and so easy to get in and out, which is actually a good point because those small blocks are really cheap. Like 6 events worth of fuel would be the cost of a crate engine. I could lower that cost very simply, and it's not experimental like trying to make, the craziest lightweight whatever car to get the best tire wear. I'm just kind of interested in tire wear, I guess. Not so much fuel. So anyways, let's talk about tires. Now, first thing to do is to identify the problem. Now, on this car, we used one full set of Valinos in 2 days, and then this partial set. And that was like 45, 50 gallons of fuel, which means we're going through a full 20 gallons per, if I remember correctly, it's a 20 gallon cell. We're going through a full 22 or 23 gallons of race fuel before we swap or maybe 25 gallons before we swap tires. That is a lot of good tire wear. Now, to talk about the tires specifically, we have to talk about what is taking these tires out. This was the outside tire on that track, except no, it wasn't. So I guess maybe we swapped these side to side. So the tires on this car, because the car is pretty light and it doesn't have a lot of weight on the rear end, because it has pretty bad weight distribution, because we removed 250 pounds of lead. Oh, I could also cut that thing off, but it doesn't really weigh anything. These tires aren't necessarily dying from abrasion, because you can see there's still a ton of tread depth in there. They were dying from heat because I was hot lapping them 20 laps at a time, which is a driver's mistake. And they were starting to blister and then pop the blisters, and then you would lose the tire. So I could get probably double the laps out of these tires if I allowed them to cool down, but I didn't really want to let them to cool down because I was limited on the amount of track time I was going to get because of, I already in 2 days went through like 50 gallons of fuel. So I was driving a ton, but I was playing in my toy and I wanted to drive as much as possible. And if I did a lap or two and then came off track, like most people do at normal drift events, I wouldn't get 100 laps a day or something like that. And I was trying to just put in massive seat time and get in a lot of like practice in this car and feel it out so that I could make good decisions later on for how I want to change it, because we're testing it. And because I can't go out and test all the time, I was really abusive on the tires. So if you look over here, what was happening, and I think again this tire was on the other side, is I would heat up these tires, they would be at almost full tread depth, and then because I would put so much heat into them, they weren't dying from abrasion and getting like rubbed off on the ground. They were actually chewed up on the ground like sandpaper. They were getting so much heat in them that this would then bubble, and then after that bubbled, it would rip off. So if I wanted to fix tire wear before making the car lighter or taking out horsepower or doing anything, I could just drive differently and not abuse the tires and probably double the tire life. So this entire video might just be dumb because it wasn't a build of the car problem which was causing this type of tire wear, which was already really good tire wear. It was a problem of the driving, which is easier to change in some ways, but also harder because I don't want to drive less. I want to drive more. So realistically, water sprayers would be like either I come off track, get water sprayers, or we put water on track in the form of like some water tank that we drive through, or I have water sprayers on here. Something to cool off the tires would be important, and because I'm not going to stop and let them cool off naturally, yeah. So, and I would say these got maybe 50 laps on them at least, maybe more. And again though, once you get to the point where you're getting 50 laps on a set of tires, I don't know how much better we can necessarily get it. And it gets really hard. Maybe I actually got like 70 laps on a set of tires, but because of the amount of time like it takes to get 70 laps in an afternoon, if you were to get say 130 laps or something like that, the time frame in between each lap is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter, only increasing the amount of heat that goes into the tires, which makes it even harder to try and alleviate the actual tire wear, if that makes sense. I'm thinking this through as I go, and I'm thinking I don't even need to modify the car for weight like I was thinking, or moving the weight around. Like moving the weight around would actually make the car more balanced and everything else and make it faster on track, which would be rad. But the tires are actually a problem of, whatever else. Now, another thing, and this is almost the most important thing with making a drift car get really good tire wear, and I should have led with this, maybe I do an editing, is the point of you want the car to barely be able to drift sometimes. You don't want to be able to just like annihilate the tires. You want the car to struggle a bit with the amount of power it makes versus the grip it makes. That means you can't have such a big differential in wheel speed versus ground speed. So if I were to add a bunch of horsepower to this thing, it would obviously get way worse and tire wear. But then I could compensate by putting a different ring gear in it, because it currently has a 544, and that would allow me to go to a 410 and just have the ability to shift into a different gear and not have so much wheel speed, but also would let me go faster on track. Because right now the car probably only goes 85 miles an hour or something like that. And at 85 miles an hour, I can't go to Harris Hill or any of the big tracks because I can't go fast enough. I guess that also brings me to the conclusion of, we're not quite at the conclusion yet, but how much do I think I can get out of a set of tires on this car? Can I get, I have no idea what just pulled up. It sounds like a Harley or something. Can I get 100 laps out of a set of tires on this thing? Is it worthwhile to go through all that effort and maybe chop the car up more, move the radiator, do all those things? Maybe just making the thing faster and drift would be a better idea. And in this video, I was gonna kind of like, I'm just sharing my thought process of how we're gonna modify this car next, because the easiest thing is just put a new carb on it, do shocks, let the cards fall where they are on that. Or we could go nuts and we could mount the radiator back here because we do have room. We could do a bunch of things, but then we're gonna lose all this nice sheet metal. If I put a body on it, how's it gonna function? It works so well right now. Should I do it? Is it wasted money to go through all that effort? We don't want to do random modifications that aren't necessarily going to make the thing better, if you know what I mean. I had kind of an idea where I was going with this video when I started, which was to make the thing get the best tire life possible and to minimize consumables. And then as I sit here, I think I should just water down the tires. And now I'm having some giant mental conundrum of like wasting my time with all this stuff, when the easiest solution is to look for the problem, think about the problem, and then solve the problem. One more aside, when talking about building ultimate race cars, I have this humongous fuel cell back here, 20 gallon. It's completely back behind the rear end. We could move this, and this might get rid of like the transitional weirdness of the car by moving it up here. We do have plenty of room in front of the axle to get it up above the drive shaft. We could go down to a 10 gallon fuel cell. A 20 gallons not necessarily necessary. That sounded weird. And we would get that more into the middle of the car. And half of the back of this car, like I could just remove this as well. Although it'd get rid of my crumple zone, I could also cut this off and remake the crumple zone farther back, or I guess farther forward. We would lose probably 15 pounds, 20 pounds on that bash bar. I could do a bunch of things like that, but there's something to be said for all the lines on the fuel system are run. The fuel system is there. I don't want to redo things to try and get, 3% differences in the car. I don't want to ruin my life, but you could absolutely try and go get little, 3% differences back and forth and try and make the car significantly better. But we're not trying to do that. We're trying to utilize a platform that's already built and not make our lives more difficult, if you know what I mean. Because I think I would like to get a body on this thing and make it look like a real car, because I don't really want to be driving a dune buggy at Lone Star Drift events and encouraging people to do death carts and stuff. This is more of not building death carts, but transitioning a real race car over to drifting and what that can mean for like the future of drifting and available drift cars out there. And I would like to go get a couple more of these cars. I just saw one of these on the internet for sale really close to me for 15 grand with a 700 horsepower motor. It's like an ARCA car, way more advanced than this chassis. Although I don't think it's necessary, but I kind of do want to try that. So maybe I should go get that thing.